have a hard time playing by the rules when it comes to writing. And so I broke all the rules. And I'm not going to take any more time to tell you about it. I'm going to go straight into the workshop. It's a series of videos. After each video, I will speak to that video. So go ahead and start with lesson 1.
The first thing I want to talk about is your premise and your plot. And I'm going to say to you, know your premise, but not the plot. In a fiction book, there's a difference between the premise and the plot. The premise is the concept of the book, the ideas that you have for the book. Whereas the plot is more detailed. It's what happens in the book, all the events that make up the story. So I want you to, first of all, just know your premise, but forget about the plot for now. Think of it as a story and not as a book. See, a lot of people set out to write a book and it becomes very intimidating because they're thinking, oh, I want to do 300 pages, 400 pages, 65,000 words. How do you get there? If you look at it as a book to begin with, you could be intimidating your own self. So think of it as a story, because after all, that's what a book is. It's a story, a fiction book anyway. Write down the idea for the story. That's your premise. Not all the details, just random ideas that you have for your story. It doesn't matter whether they make sense. It doesn't matter whether they fit together or not. And then write some benchmarks. Now, the benchmarks are things that you want to see happen in the story. It doesn't matter if they're in order. Forget chronology. That doesn't matter. Just little things that you want to see happen in the story. Don't get too married to your benchmarks, but write them down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Silent Stones. The Silent Stones is my last fiction. And the story, the premise is about this house. It's the people in the book are actually telling the story of the house. Even though it is the story of the family and the people, but it's really about the house. And so it started with my premise. And there's certain things that I had in my mind. Walls have ears. We've all heard that before. Houses retain energy that's in the house. Things that have happened in these houses for years stay in the house. They retain energy. There's history that's stored in the walls of houses. And walls keep secrets in and keep intruders out. So if walls have ears, and I'm talking about this house has been listening to secrets for centuries. What do I know about the house? So I thought about the house, and the house is real, by the way. The story is fiction. The house has been around since slavery days. The book takes place in Jamaica, where there were plantations, and we had sugarcane plantations, and we had slavery. We know that the house has been in the hands of this black family since just after slavery. And there's a story about how the family came to own the house. Now, I didn't know what the story was, and I didn't decide what the story was. I just knew the premise, not the plot. I know that there's an old lady who is dying, and dying with her secrets, who lives in this house, and she lives in the house with family members. I had no idea who the family members were. Again, premise, not plot. So these are the things that I knew about the Silent Stones before I even started writing. I knew the book was about the house and the family that occupies it. The walls have ears, and the house has been keeping secrets for centuries, and that the secrets would come out somehow. I knew the premise, not the plot. So once again, remember, think of it as a story, not as a book. Write down your ideas for the story, just random ideas, and write benchmarks, things you'd like to see in the story. The premise, not the plot.
Okay, so that is lesson 1. And I know when we're taught how to write, we're taught that we need to decide who our characters are. We need to write them down. We need to give them all their characterizations. We need to decide exactly where this story is going and all those things. And we need to have all of that written down, and we need to go over it and, all of that before we even start writing. That did not work for me. So what I did and what I do with my books is, again, I know the premise. I know exactly what I wanted this book to be about. This is the Silent Stones, and it's about this house. And I knew that the house had all these secrets. The other thing that I knew was I had to figure out, how is the house going to get the secrets out? And I thought, I'm from Jamaica. We like a good duppy story, a good ghost story. And I thought, a little passé. So I had to make the house talk. How was the house going to talk? And I decided that one of the main characters, in addition to this old lady, was going to be a young man. So we could see the generations between this old lady who was dying and her very young great-grandson who decides he wants to get the history of his family. That's very, very fractured. He is of Jamaican descent, but born in Jamaica, but grew up in the States, knows almost nothing about his heritage. Those were the things I knew. And I let the story develop on its own. My benchmarks, there were certain things I knew had to happen. I knew he had to go to Jamaica. I knew that he had to have some kind of connection with the walls in the house. I wasn't quite sure what the connection was, but I knew he had to be the one to reveal what was happening in the house. So that was a benchmark. There was going to be a point where this old lady was going to die. That was a benchmark. And that her death would be the catalyst to a lot of other things happening. That was a benchmark. So these were things I knew had to happen in the book. Where exactly in the book they happened was not decided before they happened. So that's lesson one. Know your premise. Know what your book is going to be about, but don't get so caught up in plotting, because I find you get so caught up in it. Now you're writing to meet the plot. You're writing to make sure that these benchmarks and these plot things that you have get in there. And sometimes you start out with them, and by the time you get halfway through, you're like, you know what, it's not working. And then you want to start all over. So